Hello, guys, and good morning. Well, if you've never heard me talk about this book, it's my favorite book in the whole wide world, A Course in Miracles, Foundation for Inner Peace. This book is about forgiveness if you have not read it ever. And I think what I like about it the most is that sometimes we forget that when we are in the process of trying to forgive someone else, we forget that we are parts of each other and reflections of each other. And when we forgive someone else, we really are only forgiving ourselves. That's why I think this book is written on dementia, because it always talks about how when we can't forgive other people, we hold ourselves in bondage with them. So even like thinking back to certain situations and having anger arise, that's a biochemical cascade. I think back to this time in my life where I wish I wouldn't have stayed. I wish I would have walked away. I wish I would have valued myself. And in that moment, thinking about that past situation, there's some anger that pops up for myself. I'm talking about, and you might also have this too. There's an anger that pops up, and it's like I could focus that anger out on that other individual in the situation, but really I'm just only angry with myself a majority of the time because I didn't value myself enough to walk away and to choose myself, to choose my own peace within my own biochemistry. Because we're either choosing like heaven or hell, sides of the sympathetic fight or flight or the parasympathetic rest or digest. And this really cute couple reached out to me in email a while ago, and they had asked me, they said, what is the biochemistry of forgiveness? There is so much that goes on within the biochemistry when we allow ourselves to forgive, to sit in forgiveness for ourselves. And again, it's not about the other person. And a lot of times, like we're so tunnel visioned. It's like just like when you get into an argument with somebody, we are so tunnel visioned into pushing the guilt and the shame. Again, I really just want to recommend reading this book. I'm about to finish it for the fourth time. I'm going to keep reading it probably for the rest of my life, to be honest. I can't imagine myself not reading this book on a daily basis. It's like my version of the Bible, because it kind of always points the finger back at me. And I like that it does that, because again, when we get into relationships with other people, we tend to forget that people come into our lives to just be a reflection of ourselves. And if you look at biochemistry at the tiniest cellular level, like if you even just think about like a water molecule, the hydrogens and the oxygen, it's like things, this world is so beautiful in the way that it attracts things, and we attract other people energetically. And it's really easy to think about this. If you might not believe in energy, you might think it's woo woo. This is chemistry and physics and biology. But when someone walks into the room and you don't like them, there's a negative attraction. There's some repellent attractive force that is not quite getting along. And then same thing with, I really get along with this person. Why is that? Because it's the biochemistry underneath. And a lot of that really is like, it's our thought processes that we're putting out. Like, you know, people who are constantly thinking negative things, like, again, that's a biochemical cascade. So I'm perpetuating that. And then when other people, like, I like this book because it says your brother will confirm to you what you are thinking about yourself. So if I constantly get into arguments with people, or if I'm having bad interactions, I understand what I'm thinking about myself. My thought processes are not good. They're negative. They're degrading my biochemistry, my health. So how can I get onto that other side of forgiveness? And I really think like that's where the protein and the nourishment and the amino and the fatty acids come in, because our body is not just a body, it's trillions of cells. So when I'm working on forgiveness with myself, and what I've been focused on for the last few years is giving myself the nourishment. If I continue to starve myself, if I continue to, and not necessarily like starving myself per se, but if I'm not feeding my body nutrient dense foods, ignorance is not bliss, right? Like if I, so I mean, I don't want to, pick on anyone individually. So, but if I decide that I'm going to eat a vegan diet, and let's say that I have this belief that it's the best diet for me and for the whole world, but I know nothing about the biochemistry, I'm not going to be getting, especially B12, creatine, and these amino acids and these micronutrients. My body is going to be missing that. And not because I have intention to not get this in my diet. I really think I'm doing something really good for myself. And I think I'm doing something good for the planet. But ignorance is not bliss. I may come into issues with B12 deficiencies. That could be a whole host of things. I could come into iron deficiencies, anemic problems. There's a whole host of issues that can come. And it reminds me of the quote that Alan Watts has. He says, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." I think we oftentimes, like with our health, like I think that like the guiding force of this universe, whatever that is for you that you call it, nudges us with these symptoms. It nudges us through the biochemistry. So if I feel like I'm in an anxious and irritated state, if I feel tired, fatigued, if I have pain in my body, that's all signs that my body's trying to communicate. The universal energy communicates through my body that it needs me to shift and change in some way. And so I think that that's beautiful because, the body, if you think about it, it's so patient with us. It's so in a place where it could be so agitated and irritated, and it could immediately, when we cause harm to our body, when we ingest a bunch of chemicals and toxic stuff, and we participate in relationships that we know we aren't good for us. When I keep saying yes, even though my body screams no to an invitation to be in the presence of someone else, my body doesn't immediately like betray me. It gives me these soft symptoms of tightness, of feeling fatigued, feeling anxious, feeling ungrounded. But that is a form of patience, and I think that is so beautiful. Like, I just think it's one of the most beautiful things about us, because like years ago I was struggling with feeling irritated with people, and I had no idea. Like, I was basically just nutrient deficient. Like, I have come to terms, and I think this is important too, like when you come to terms with your sensitivity, when you're starting to like wake up, the mask is being taken off, and you just come to terms with the fact that like you can't participate in this world the same way as everyone else did. So like for me, one of the first times I realized this was like with alcohol. I started to become so sensitive. I was basically like allergic to alcohol. In college, you go to college and you start drinking with your friends. And I was like at a party school, and I never really liked drinking all that much, but really I thought it was like impossible to be sober in the environments that I was in. It was like, oh my God, I hate being here. I need to drink almost to the point of blacking out just to feel comfortable in this situation. Like, my body was definitely revolting, and I didn't understand this language that my body was speaking to me at the time when I was in college. So I, had gotten to this point, and that's why I said yesterday in the video I made, we don't change our lives. We don't change our lives until we're really, really fed up, unfortunately. But you don't have to wait. But I basically was like, I can't keep going like this. Like, I don't know. I was in a really dark place, and I was like, I really just, I can't keep doing this anymore. I don't know what's going to happen, but I need to change some things. So I stopped drinking for a little while, and I was starting to eat things that I was like, okay, this is healthy for me. So like, really, I had no idea like what nutrition was, amino and fatty acids, like all that other stuff. So like I was eating, like, I thought whole grain bread, like all this bread with all this processed chemical, like I thought that was healthy. I thought that we had to be getting it, because if y'all know, like the food pyramid has flipped recently within the last year, and all those whole grains and stuff at the top. I had this idea about, fiber, just the normalcy of things. I thought Nutella was a health food. So like one of my favorite things to eat when I first started on this journey was like, I would get a piece of bread, I put Nutella on it, I put a banana on it, and I put cinnamon sugar on the top with a drizzle of honey. So I was probably really I was really carbing it up. Really probably, I was doing much better than eating whatever else, that I was eating at the time, because I worked at a snowball stand, I worked at a catering company, so lots of fried stuff, pastas, lots of sugar. And really just my body was like screaming, like 911 alarms going off in the system. But then I started to try and do some things like Cheerios. I was addicted to like Cheerios for 2 years. That was my thing. I was eating, because on the box it says heart healthy, It's like, this is healthy for my heart, right? I had no idea. I was eating Cheerios, like almond milk, but I would put bananas in there, like, and I thought like this is healthy, and it helped me a lot. It helped me a lot just getting out of that, just trying to focus and give myself nourishing foods was helpful in a lot of ways. And I did start to eat more protein. Like I remember I would eat pork chops and try to, I would eat like a protein and a vegetable, and I still was eating a lot of rice, and I think I was eating some beans at the time too. But at this time in my life, like I started to become very sensitive. So I tried to, I realized I was like, maybe I'm being too much of a hermit, and people telling me that, I should go out and have fun. So like I would start to say yes to things, and I would go out to the bars or whatever, and I would drink, but I would just feel so ill. Like my face would flush immediately, and I felt like I could vomit with really just one sip of the alcohol. It felt horrible. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm really just an extremely lightweight. I started to look up these symptoms, and I found like Asian flush syndrome, which is common amongst the Asian population, where they're missing alcohol dehydrogenase, which is an enzyme that breaks down alcohol in the liver. So I kind of just came to terms of, I self-diagnosed myself with Asian flush syndrome. I'm not Asian, but I was having the same symptoms, and I was like, maybe because I stopped drinking, my body was like, okay, well, we don't need these enzymes anymore. Like, why put energy towards that, or put energy towards making other enzymes, other things? Enzymes are just proteins, and the body is like enzyme. Like everything is like protein. You come back down, start studying the biochemistry. Everything is protein. Like, it's so beautiful, protein and fat. But I had to come to terms with the fact that I couldn't jump back into my old life anymore. I couldn't jump back into those old habits. And it was funny. I was listening to this video of this girl on Instagram. She said, "You gonna have to trust that motherfucking gap. There's no going back now. Like, you've already stepped through the threshold of a different chapter of you and your life and your habits and who you are and who you're growing into. And even if you try to go back, you will not be able to." And so that's what I'm talking about with coming into terms with sensitivity and the way that you are, showing up in the world. Sometimes your habits and even your friend groups, the ways in which you commune with others has to change. And, I think the discernment becomes a lot stronger too, because I became allergic to alcohol, so it was definitely easy to discern that was not good for me. And then when you start to look at the biochemistry and the fact that like it has no benefits really to us. And there are other ways to have fun as well. And what I'll say is, I went to a wedding when I was on carnivore diet recently, within the first month that I was on it, and I recovered a lot faster, and I also didn't feel as much of a lightweight. Like, I was able to have like 2.5 martinis, and like that's a lot for me. And I didn't feel as hungover. So I do think that there is strength in like the carnivore and ketogenic diet. What I look at it is hydration diets. So we hydrate from our minerals and nutrients in the body. But anyway, so coming to terms with your sensitivity, and like even like I'll say, something that I used to be very okay with and I'm not okay with anymore is like bright blue LED lights at night make me feel ill, like sick. And people know, like my family knows, like if the sun has gone down and like those bright lights are on, I'm not going to be around. Like I have to leave the room, or I put on my little blue light blockers if I have to, subject myself to that LED light at night. But it really, like, I can feel, I think you just become so sensitive to your environment and how things start to affect you. And that's the biggest thing with the carnivore and ketogenic diets. A lot of people talk about it. They say, I really have a feel for how this feels in my body. I'm also experiencing like how caffeine feels in my body, like at a very visceral level. Like, you know, I can feel how it tightens my eye muscles. I can feel how it puts me into that sympathetic state, but it's very subtle. And I think when there's a lot of noise in your system, like when your body's like trying to always put out the fires of inflammation and take care of like damage, like we don't hear very well like what our body is really saying to us. Like when you get really still, it's the same thing as like, can I listen to myself better when I'm like, if I just sit down in the quietness, I can hear myself a lot better than if I am at the bar and there's loud music and there's a bunch of different energies around. When I'm by myself, I can really be still and I can listen to myself like at my most baseline level. And honestly, it reminds me of even like going to the gym, and taking a whole bunch of pre-workout and all this other stuff. We dull our sense of fatigue in the gym, and I think a lot of people end up overtraining and they're not listening to their bodies. They're not really connecting to their nervous system. They're approaching it from a very masculine way, which there's nothing wrong with that. But overtraining and becoming more stiff and rigid after exercising is just like, I don't understand. It's just it's counterintuitive, because like you go to the gym, like you're thinking about the Fashion Network and trying to get stronger. Like the strongest thing you could do is become more flexible. Flexibility and resiliency is the strongest place to be in the body. And like if you look over the course of the lifetime, like babies are the most resilient and flexible. They bend everywhere. As we get into middle age, we're like our strongest that we'll ever be, strongest and most flexible. And as we become older, everything in the body starts to become stiff and rigid. So if I'm going to the gym and I'm becoming more stiff and rigid in pain, that's also communication that my body is saying, look, we should probably change things up here, whether that be how I'm approaching the weights or how I'm approaching everything outside of that. So like with the carnivore diet that I've been doing, I've been not getting sore from the gym. I've been expecting to be sore. I've been pushing myself. For the last few weeks, I've gone to the gym every single morning. Today, it was actually my first day that I didn't go because I'm having a Sunday, just out in the sun and like cleaning and taking care of a lot of things that I need to do. And, but I've been expecting to be sore and I'm not sore. And so I think that that's very interesting, and then it takes a big leap of faith to do something different. We've always been taught, like, again, it's just like the best ideas in the world, like the best minds in the world, even take Einstein, like his theories and everything were brilliant, and yet we always have flaws to our understanding of the way the world works because our senses are so limited. So it's so important to stay open to new ways of doing things. And even if you have to take like a few steps back just to build a better foundation to move forward in a more stable way, that's so much better than continuing to push the gas and to go in a direction incredibly fast that's unsustainable. They say like your speed only matters if you're going in the right direction. So I don't know, stay open and curious. And what I'm thinking about too is like I'm being reminded of this doctor. His name was Semmelweis, And I made a video on this before, but I kind of deleted it because I wanted to do it a little bit better. But Semmelweis, I think it was in the 1800s. It's a big story in microbiology. But basically, he introduced to the medical community that hand washing was extremely important before giving birth to women, before, allowing women to give birth, right? It would greatly reduce the risk of dying because at this point in time, like, if you were going to give birth, it was extremely dangerous. And your chances of dying in childbirth were incredibly high, especially in this place that he was working at. Because what happened was a lot of the scientists and doctors, they were doing autopsies. They were doing autopsies in the morning, and then they were not washing their hands at all or anything. And they were just going to the delivery ward to help these women give birth. And there were 2 delivery wards. One of them was known as a high death risk. So women, if they were scheduled to go to this high death ward, they would delay and try and have their babies just in the street because the risk of dying was so high. They would rather have their baby in the middle of the street. It was crazy. And Semmelweis was starting to question this. He was like, why are some women in this one ward dying so much higher than this other ward? And one of his good friends was doing one of the autopsies one morning. I read all this, so I wasn't there firsthand, so I can't tell you if I'm 100% correct. But this story has always really touched my heart with being open, being curious. One of his friends had gotten cut by one of the scalpel blades in the autopsy room, and he ended up dying of a similar disease pathology as the women who were dying from the childbirth. And Semmelweis was like, we need to start washing our hands. What happened was, when he said this, it deeply offended the doctors at the time, because basically he was saying, bro, you're dirty. That's how they took it, is like they became defensive instead of being open and starting to be curious and question what he was actually saying. They became extremely defensive, and they said, I don't have to wash my hands. I'm a distinguished gentleman. Like, you don't know anything. So basically he was like outcasted for this, and it was a really sad story. I think nobody listened to him, and he ended up like kind of going insane, and they put him in a mental institution like years later. He had signs of early Alzheimer's dementia. I think he ended up drinking a lot just because like he was probably just way ahead of his time. But anyway, they put him in a mental institution. The guards beat him up, and he died like 3 days later from an infectious wound, which is really sad because years later, other doctors started to listen to this and look at that, and they were like, we need to start washing our hands before we do surgery or anything like that. And so now, of course, like in all surgeries, like very sterile in the hospitals, they wash their hands to reduce bacterial infection, especially with open wounds, because there is bacteria everywhere. Even when we wash our hands with soap and water, there's still microbes on our skin, because we rely on microbes and bacteria for our body. There's like more bacteria and microbes in our body than we have cells. Bacteria pathologies everywhere. Bacteria run the world. And anything that we eat, we're open to risk, right? Anything that we put into our body, we are under risk of infection. So that's why it's so important to understand how to keep the immune system strong. And, one of my favorite ways, again, going into the sun, but then eating nutrient-dense foods and strength training, and then this positive thought processes. So anyway, I love the story of Semmelweis because it just goes to show you how important it is to remain open to different ideas and ways of doing things, especially in this time of technology. Because a lot of people, like I've had people come to me and say, we've basically figured everything about the body out. And that's not true. There's so much that we still do not understand. And if you start to dive deep down into microbiology, into the workings of the cell, we will still see like we are at like an infancy phase of understanding the true capacities of the body, how we heal, the process of forgiveness, like forgiveness and regeneration and youth within the body. And I think that's so beautiful because there's so much room to explore, and when you feel like there is stuff to still explore, there's room for curiosity, like we don't have it all figured out. We never do, and we never will, because this this earth is so beautiful. There's so much, like, we don't have the capacity, they say like we're little drops pretending to be the ocean, and that's why it's really important to keep your mitochondria in mind whenever you're eating and in your daily life, because mitochondria, like, they're the guiding light in the energy of the cell, and they help us to find expression, and they help us take the mask off and be ourselves and be patient and be curious and, have that childlike wonder. Without them, mitochondria dysfunction is part of like every disease state, as they're the powerhouse of the cell. So they're doing all the work, and they love us, but we have to give them what they need. And when we have like high carbohydrate diets, we shut off mitochondria function. So it's really important to invest into the mitochondria, protein and fat, the B vitamins especially. They need the B vitamins. If you're thinking about, I'm going to supplement magnesium, just remember, Mama Nature doesn't do mono supplementation. Like we were just saying, she is complex. When I think about supplementing magnesium, I am zooming in on the mitochondria themselves, and I'm looking at the little process within them. And magnesium is considered a cofactor, really important cofactor. But what is it cofactoring? Okay, it's cofactoring the main factors, which is the B vitamins and these large amino acid structures and protein structures. So when you supplement magnesium, we have to make sure that we are supplementing an actual diet that's full of these nutrient-dense foods and going into the sunlight to support that breakdown and that transfer of all these pathways and the exercise as well. So anyway, I hope this video is helpful, but definitely longer one than I'm used to doing, but I do hope that it was helpful for you. I wanted to share a little bit from the Course in Miracles, so I guess we'll end with it. It says, unless he gives, he will not know he has, for giving is the proof of having. For who could give unless he has, and who would lose by giving what must be increased thereby? And, I think that always comes back to the nutrition for me. When I read A Course in Miracles, I always think about the biology and the nutrition. But who can give? Unless he gives, he will not know he has. And that reminds me of, like, if we don't give ourselves the nutrients, we will never be able to get out of this stress response, out of this fight or flight place. Unless I give myself what I need, I'll always feel empty. I'll always feel like there's something on the outside that I need. I will always feel like I'm in a place of need, and that I don't have what I have to be calm and happy. So anyway, I'm going to leave this here. I just want to remind you before we go that we don't see ourselves accurately in the mirror. We are trillions of tiny, intelligent, beautiful little factories. Nobody can take your intelligence or your beauty away. Nobody. Not even you. And I'll leave this here. You can like, share, and subscribe, but catch you later.